This is always a pleasure here on Radio Row at the Combine, talking with Dan Graziano, NFL Insider from ESPN. He's on Get Up. He's on NFL Live. He is the main man when you're talking ball from ESPN. Appreciate the time, Dan,
My
first
pleasure.
and foremost. Always great having you here.
Better than the last time we saw each other, which we were talking about was outside the locker room in Jacksonville this last season.
That wasn't a great day for the Colts. Yeah.
It typically hasn't been the last couple of years down there.
Was it like the first Minshew start? Or
It
no?
was.
Yeah, so
It was.
He didn't have a good day. They had better days after that.
Yeah, there were many
doubt.
better days after that.
That is the voice of Larra Overton, by the way. I'm Matt Taylor. All right, Dan, so you've been at the Combine. You're no stranger to these walls in this venue. What is most intriguing you so far as you capture the entire league, follow all these storylines? What is keeping you the most busy?
I think the Bears story in the top of the draft, what are they going to do and when? I think that's a big thing because, if they stay put and make the pick, as I think a lot of people have come to expect, then they'll trade Justin Fields. And then to whom, right? And who's interested in him and what can they get for him? So I think a lot of those conversations are going on here. So trying to keep up with that. And then, this is where the groundwork gets laid for free agency, right? Like, is Kirk Cousins going to stay in Minnesota? Is he going to go somewhere else? What happens with Baker Mayfield? And then, all these receivers that still are looking for contracts.
Yeah, I mean, I know teams got to have a quarterback. I realize that. But how much urgency do you think the Bears are going to receive from other teams to grab Justin Fields when there's kind of an incomplete grade on him in Chicago, right?
It's an incomplete grade, but we've seen enough to think. I mean, look, he's a starting quarterback in the NFL. That's not.
There's value to that,
right? And there are teams that are looking for that. So, and a number of them, right? I mean, you look at Atlanta's not happy with what they had last year. Obviously, Denver's not happy with what they had last year. If Cousins does leave, Minnesota's in the market. I don't know. They trade him in the division. But, the Raiders, the Patriots. So I think there's a market for him. The question is, like, if you get Justin Fields at this point in his career, are you willing and able to continue working on his development? Because he's not a finished product, and you don't know exactly how good he's going to be. It's not like you're drafting a guy. You have some track record and you have some NFL experience to build on, and that's a good thing. But it's not a ton, and there still needs to be more work. So I think that's a very interesting to see where he lands, who the coaching staff is, what they have in mind for him, and what he can still grow into.
I have two for you. I'm going to start because you mentioned free agency. What is the landscape with wide receivers this year, free agency, and how does that implicate the actions of the Colts in this situation with Michael Pittman Jr. and maybe the options that they have to try to get something done?
So we saw the Bengals earlier this week franchise T. Higgins a week ahead of the deadline, which was surprising. Why they did that, no one seems to know. It could indicate that they're interested in trading him. So you do a tag and trade. That's obviously one of the Colts options with Michael Pittman, but it sounds like, based on what Ballard said today, that's not the plan. That their plan is to have him on the team, whether that means signing him long term or playing on the franchise tag. Teams can't figure out what to pay these guys. Last year, 2 years ago, Tyreek Hill gets traded and signed. Devontae Adams gets traded and signed. A.J. Brown gets traded and signed. The wide receiver market goes through the roof. Then last year, pretty much nothing, right? Justin Jefferson doesn't get his deal. CeeDee Lamb, Higgins, Pittman, none of these guys got the extensions they were looking for. So now we're a year later. Those guys are still not signed. Everyone's waiting to see what Jefferson gets because we figure he'll set the top of the market. But it hasn't happened yet. And everybody tells me there are 6 million great receivers in this draft, and that seems to be the case every year now. And do teams want to continue to push up the top of this wide receiver market to where Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb are getting low to mid $30 million a year, or do they look at it and say, we can find replacements in the draft. We don't have to pay that much. So I think there's a lot of push-pull there on trying to figure out what the numbers are for these receivers, and that's slowing everything down. It likely results in Michael Pittman Jr. getting franchised while they continue to work it out and wait to see what else happens on that landscape.
So am I hearing from you that maybe wide receiver is becoming the new running back because of how replaceable that position is with the...
I would say no, because, A, there's a long way to go to get way down to where the running backs are. It's a desolate, sad place right now for running backs in the open market. And the receivers are making a lot more.
But to pay a guy $30 million on top of a franchise quarterback, too,
so that's the question, right?
Yeah.
So, like, if you're the Bengals, They love T. Higgins, but Jamar Chase is coming up for an extension. Can you pay them both and the quarterback at the level that they are? The answer may be yes, and there are people that would tell you it's a good idea when you have elite talent, keep it together, and then figure the rest out, like draft really well at offensive line and linebacker and running back, and like hit on.
Then you're shopping at Walmart.
Easier said than done, right? Exactly. So, or again, really relying on your draft picks to hit and develop.
Yeah.
So, our team's going to be able to pay a number one wide receiver $30+ million and still have enough else at the position. And I think teams are working through that right now, especially all these teams that have these receivers that are looking for big contracts.
With the Colts and having Anthony Richardson, that basically is kind of going to go into a rookie year all over again. He kind of had a redshirt year, so to speak, despite he did start a handful of games. Does that make it even more imperative, so to speak, to try to have that veteran presence with a Pittman than to just say, oh, no, we're fine, letting him go, and we can draft somebody, this is really deep, and we're going to have him and Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, and that's it?
Yeah, I do think there's something to that, having someone with experience in that room with the young quarterback. I remember last year talking to the Texans ahead of the season, and one of the reasons they signed Dalton Schultz for tight end was because they knew their receiver group was going to be very young around a rookie quarterback, and they wanted somebody who had been in a huddle and had seen all these situations that were going to unfold and could get people in the right places. So yes, I do think there's something to that. If for some reason it didn't work out with Pittman, say he demands a trade, I don't know what he's going to. This is all speculation, right? But like we've seen it with other guys. Say he were to demand a trade or refuse to play on the franchise tag, I think they would probably look to find another veteran pass catcher to put in that room to help with Richardson's development.
Who you would have to pay. So you got to pay somebody one way or another.
Right, but it could be a veteran that, like Dalton Schultz cost the Texans $10 million last year. It's not, that's not right. So
break of the bank, yeah.
Yeah.
One question, we joked about being in Jacksonville earlier this season, and, we mentioned that the season was eventful, right? Maybe a little more eventful than what we, expected it to be. Your evaluation of the rookie head coaching job of Shane Steichen and what he was able to do, put this team on the verge of a playoff berth, even given all of what he had to handle in the last season.
Tremendous. Like Coach of the Year level performance had they made the playoffs. It's tough to give it to a coach that doesn't make the playoffs. So, but he was in that mix for sure, and especially the way, the quarterback fell apart. You can see the way they play, right? Like the good coaching is reflected in the way they play, and the buy-in to the offense, right? The way in which people were able to operate what he wanted to even when you were substandard personnel-wise. There's no offense to Gardner Minshew, but he was not the team's first choice to start a quarterback last year, right? So you're dealing with Plan B and Plan C in a lot of cases. So the way they performed, the way they hung in till the end, speaks very well of him and his staff, and I think that's something that came out of last year. You feel like in some ways it's a lost year because Richardson needed to play and he needed to develop, and that was a big part of the team's plan.
Right.
And so now you're starting from, not square one, but like square 1.5, right?
Yeah.
So, and that stinks. But I do think you saw enough from the coaching staff to go in thinking, hey, they got a chance to do something here. If the kid can play and if he can develop quickly, then things could start to happen around here.
Dan, you're always watching the league from a national scope. Where do you have the Colts? What is an ideal situation for them to be able to get into the mix of the playoffs? Because we talked at the end of the season, it really stung to lose that game in Week 18, but it also stung to think about how things are going to go moving forward because – sitting here right now, you already know who 4 or 5 playoff teams are next year. You got the Bills, you got the Bengals coming back, you've got the Chiefs maybe the Steelers, the Miami. Houston's going to be there, Jacksonville. So, not saying it's
Pittsburgh,
right?
Cleveland.
You're proving my point here. So, where do you have the Colts, and what do they need to do to get into the mix of those teams?
So, again, they were in the mix, even though they lost their quarterback, right? And this division that they play in has not, the last couple of years, required a ton of wins in order to finish on top. So that's nice. You don't have the Chiefs in your division, so that's helpful.
Yeah.
But Houston looks like they're going to stick around, and Jacksonville should have been better. They fell apart at the end.
They had 8 wins in the first 11.
Yeah, so if they get it together around Trevor Lawrence and Doug Peterson, they'll be formidable, obviously. So I think it really is about the quarterback and how quickly he develops into something. Can he play the way C.J. Stroud played last year? Is that asking too much of him? If he can, then all of a sudden you're right there. Like the Texans were, we're a second-round playoff team. So, this isn't – it can happen quickly. But I think because there's still so many questions around him, I think it's very difficult to answer that question of where they sit because we don't know.
When you are going all season long, going to different games week in and week out, reporting over the course of the week, where do you get the most benefit from this week at the Combine?
There's no such thing as a Rolodex anymore, but an imaginary Rolodex gets fatter, right?
Yeah.
So I leave here with more phone numbers than I had when I got here.
Yeah.
I meet face-to-face with people that I'm on the phone with or texting with all year, and this week may be the only time we ever meet face-to-face in the course of the year. You get to pull people aside and have casual background off-the-record conversations that inform, I'll go on NFL Live today having had multiple conversations in the hallways here, and if they ask me what's going on with the Cleveland Browns, I might have some sense of what their plan is for Nick Chubb's contract situation. So it's just this constant flow of information and insight into just sort of how these teams are setting up their off seasons, what they think their needs are, what their plans might be, and you learn stuff. And again, I think the biggest benefit though is the relationship and source development and maintenance.
I mean, this is human being 101, but you're way more likely to get someone to return a call or a text
if we've met in person.
If you've met and shook their hand, right?
Sure, absolutely. And I'm too old now to run it till 2 or 3 in the morning like some of these guys do. I did that. I did my time with that, but you can do it. Like if you want to stay out till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning at some of these spots, like you can really kind of get to a point where you call a guy in a couple months and it's like, oh yeah, that was a great night.
Hey man, remember when?
What can I do for you? Right? But yeah, I mean that sounds silly, but it's true. I mean you get to actually spend time.
My
and bond
point
with
is,
people.
a lot of people aren't willing to do that anymore.
No, it's not easy. I mean, you're tired at the end of the combine.
We also went through a pandemic, I should say, where everybody could talk to each other across the world virtually.
But somehow didn't miss a combine. How did that happen? How did we not miss a combine? The 2020 combine was the last event that happened. And then by the time 21 rolled around, like we were back here. And I remember everybody was looking around like, is this okay?
Should we be here? We didn't miss a beat, though.
Shaking hands, we're doing that again? Is this allowed?
Yeah, there was a lot of this during that period of time. Fist bumps.
No question. People just kind of looking at each other sideways like, are you all right? Yeah, should we be wearing masks? Yeah.
Well, cheers to that being over. And
no kidding.
Cheers to you stopping by. And
My pleasure. Always enjoy it.
Dan is one of the kindest human beings I know.
Come on.
I
really appreciate that.
Seriously, we always have fun when I get to touch
You
these
got to
guys.
meet more people.
No, I'm serious.
Hey, come visit
I'm from
Lucas.
Jersey. You're going to mess up my reputation.
Come visit Lucas Oil this season. I got to stop seeing you on the road because, in consecutive years, it was like Foxborough for the Patriots game, Jacksonville.
Patriots game. That was the last Frank Reich game.
It was.
Yeah.
So
that was ugly.
So I like to see you, but I like to not see you on game days. So.
Well, I mean, look, a lot of it depends on how they play.
Yeah, I know.
We're going where the action is. So
it's not a hard recipe to figure out. You win games, you get Graziano.
I love it.
All right. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it.
course.
Thank you, Dan.